Post Platonism. What is it? Where does it come from? And why is it useful to you? Professor John Vervaeke of the University of Toronto is a cognitive psychologist and cognitive scientist who has been dealing with what he calls the meaning crisis. He has a series of videos 50 hours long called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and for a more full understanding of what exactly he is addressing and what is important for us as a society to address, I recommend going to the link below and exploring what he has to offer in full. But in short, I have been calling his attempt to address the meaning crisis post-Platonism, because he has been talking about the need for a post-nominalist Neo-Platonism. What does that mean? Neo-Platonism is not anything anybody ever actually called themselves. Nobody claimed to be a Neoplatonist. Neoplatonism is actually how historians of philosophy look back on early Western philosophy, the classics, and how we categorize what has come to be known as the entirety of Christian thought, including Jewish thought, Muslim thought, and various philosophies which grounded themselves in what they thought was actually Plato's philosophy plus reality. Basic ideas that were undergirding Neoplatonism was the idea that it is possible to understand the world, that all new information will improve our understanding, and a fundamental belief that an improved understanding is a primary value. It's something we should actually be working towards. In some ways, this did start with Plato, but actually, it's not clear that Plato himself was a Neoplatonist. What happened was that later thinkers, most prominently Plotinus, took ideas and his understanding of Plato and understandings of earlier philosophers like Philo of Alexandria, and created what became a bedrock for Christian thought. It was then adopted by Augustine, then the Muslim theologian Avicenna, and had clear influence on Maimonides, the Jewish thinker, and again upon Thomas Aquinas, who was a Catholic thinker. The basic beliefs that we characterized as Neoplatonism run through all of our beliefs in different ways, with different bodies of thought and disagreement, but we can categorize the basic beliefs that existed at the time as Neoplatonic. What then happened was Nominalism. Nominalism gets its name from nomos, name, and it is based on the idea that ideas are merely names, that they don't have the sort of reality that Plato and earlier and later thinkers actually, but earlier than nominalist thinkers, took for granted from Plato about the reality of universals, or what could be called the spiritual world. And this gave birth to what we call modernity and the Renaissance, and a particularly Protestant way of looking at history and the history of philosophy and thought. One very prominent name in Nominalism was William of Ockham. You may recognize that name from Occam's razor, which is actually kind of fundamental to modern scientific ideas, such as that the simplest explanation is the best explanation. And it included many assumptions that we later, through the criticisms of post-modernity, ended up rejecting, or at the very least recognizing, which many moderns, people who believed in what became modernist thought or modernity, basically took for granted. And modernity eventually, not very long actually, starting into actually the 18th century almost, but 19th century certainly, and definitely 20th century, started failing. A lot of materialist idealism failed, including, for example, communism, fascism, and generally what some people would call scientism. We ended up looking possibly towards a more subjectivist morality, because modernity did not really provide the foundations for morality that human beings need. This was most prominently the critique of Friedrich Nietzsche, but there were also academic criticisms from looking at different cultures and seeing that a lot of the things that we supposed were, in fact, just so, were not necessarily things that were agreed upon from cultures outside. And basically, modernity started to fail under the various types of criticism that various thinkers had. And so we, to some extent, have been left with an intellectual class which has been looking at postmodernism, which, again, not the best name for it, because generally it doesn't provide a complete view of how things should be, as much as it is merely a criticism of modernity. So, after Neo-Platonism, into Nominalism, into the failure of modernity, the question becomes, what do we do? Do we return to the pre-modern, as some people would like to do? Can we return to modernity, even with the critiques that we have? Some people have been actually talking about both of these things, which I think are self-evidently not feasible, because the reason we're asking these questions is both pre-modernity and modernity have failed. There has been nihilistic views of giving up and not even trying to come up with something else. There have been people who think that they would come up with completely novel approaches, and usually a completely novel approach is I mean, it's kind of silly to think that you can have a completely novel approach. Because if it is completely novel, if it has no basis in anything that we thought or knew before, then it's quite unlikely to be any good. Most of us would like to stand on the shoulders of giants and look at everything we have learned up to now and improve upon them, which leaves us with the idea of renovating our old ideas. Some people would like to see a new flourishing of things like Marxism or various philosophies. But really, what John Vervaeke has proposed, and I think the people in our little corner of the internet, the discussions that we've been having, ask us to look at the fundamental assumptions that existed in Neoplatonism, look at the criticisms of nominalism, look at the criticisms of nominalism, and end up with something which renovates Neoplatonism. So we turn to a post-nominalist Neoplatonism, which I have abbreviated as Post Platonism. We can try to be post-Platonic. That's a history of the idea. Now I will explain why not post-Platonism. Because there was never a real Neoplatonism. It's not, if you believe that ideas have a reality to them beyond just a name, that symbolism is important, that you have to embody your ideas into something that is real, a theology, a value system, then you actually end up not being able to go with just post-Platonism. You end up doing what Neoplatonists did during the time of Plotinus, Augustine, Avicenna, Maimonides, and using the basic ideas of Neoplatonism, or now post-Platonism, to make your theology, whether you call it Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Taoism, Sikhism, whatever, Baha'i, whatever you create as a body for your theology, what you can do is take post-Platonic ideas and apply them to your system of actually religion, including possibly a religion that's not a religion, which is what John Vervaeke himself has been advocating for. But in any case, this idea of post-Platonic and post-Platonism is not meant to be a replacement for those specific ideas. I'm not proposing that I stop being Jewish, or that Christians stop being Christian, or Muslims stop being Muslims. That post-Platonism can provide the type of framework that Neoplatonism did for the dialogue that we had in history itself. Please let me know what you think, comment below, and contribute to the discussion. Is the term post-Platonic useful? Is it something you would adopt for yourself? Is it something you want to discuss? And what should we say in this conversation, what's that container with which we can actually put our thoughts together, discuss, and communicate effectively.